The December dusk in the Brazilian municipality of Guanambi was falling too quickly. What 42-year-old Alcione and her 16-year-old daughter Anna were walking along the light of the road and cheerfully discussing their evening plans. Her brother's house was a few kilometers away. They had no idea that furious eyes were already watching their every step from behind the roadside thickets. An hour later, their charred hopes and the terrible secret of this evening would be buried in icy water, and the quiet provincial town would reel from brutality the police would call absolute evil. Utud Caribe. Alcione Malheiro Ribeiro was born in Guanambi, Brazil in 1979. It's a fairly large city for Bahia, with a population of over 80,000, creating a comfortable environment. Unlike some smaller towns, it offers access to education, develops infrastructure, and vadoshish and healthcare. Alcione was known as calm, sociable, and cheerful. From an early age, she developed a love for animals and a strong desire to help everyone around her. She lived with her family in a farmhouse located in a rural area on the outskirts of the city. Alcione's entire childhood and adolescence were spent surrounded by her loving family and animals. She always knew what she wanted, so even in school she decided she wanted to become a nurse or a veterinarian. After graduating from high school, Alcione enrolled in college to pursue a degree in the relevant field. Her diploma allowed her to become a nurse at Guanambi Hospital, where her professional qualities were highly valued. The young woman was known as a responsible professional capable of handling tasks of any complexity. Around this time, she met the man who would later become her husband. In early 2005, Alcione learned she was pregnant. This news was a joyful one for both her and her husband. That same year, Ana Teixeira Fernandes was born. She was a positive and bright girl growing up surrounded by the love and care of her parents. Both worked hard and supported each other. From the outside, the family might have seemed perfect. Alcione spent all her free time with Anna. She built an excellent and trusting relationship with her daughter. They shared many interests, which only grew as Alcione grew older. Just like her mother, she loved medicine, so on. She wanted to follow in her footsteps and become a nurse. Anna was an excellent student in school and a diligent student. By 2021, 16-year-old Anna was preparing to apply to several educational institutions at once. Soon she would graduate from high school and wanted to continue her education and work part-time to avoid burdening her parents financially and build a self-sufficient life without their support. She was always very independent and self-sufficient, but always eager to spend time with both her mother and father, During this period, the entire family lived in the same large country house in Guanambi where Alcione grew up. They owned a large plot of land in a picturesque area with a forest and a river nearby, Nipapes. This is why mother and daughter often strolled here in peace and solitude. They would discuss a variety of topics and simply enjoy each other's company. The family had owned this property for decades, were well known to everyone in the area, and were treated with respect. This is probably why mother and daughter felt safe here. December 2, 2021 was an ordinary Sunday that 42-year-old Alcione and 16-year-old Anna wanted to spend together. The head of the family had left for another city for work, so mother and daughter were alone. They had planned a long walk for 6 p.m. They usually used the same path which first led toward the highway that ran past the Sava family home. And after that, they walked through a pasture and large bridge surrounded by vegetation. The intended destination of this walk was Alcione's brother's house. The man was expecting his sister and niece that day. They wanted to hang out and have a barbecue. The brother waited for them until evening, but they never showed up. This was odd for the punctual and responsible Elsie and her daughter. They became even more alarmed when several attempts to call her and the girl were unsuccessful. Oti Veshvi Disklo. The man waited for several hours in the state, but at first he didn't insinuate anything. He was simply outraged by his sister's behavior. Thinking they had simply forgotten about the meeting, he decided to walk the route she was supposed to do tatim in Kuto, Tejuta to her house himself. When he made it, he noticed nothing suspicious, and when he reached Alcioni's house, he quickly realized no one was home. The man walked around, knocking on doors and windows, calling his sister and niece by name, but no one answered or noticed. All this became alarming, so the brother contacted his sister's husband, who confirmed that their plans for that day remained unchanged to coast. Alcione and Anna couldn't forget about the meeting. He was supposed to visit her brother with her daughter. The fact that neither of them did seemed very strange. Now the search was split into two teams. The men tried calling both Alcione and the girl again, but their phones were unresponsive. The missing husband then contacted neighbors and friends of the woman who he knew she might have met, but no one knew their whereabouts. The crime situation in the country was quite tense. After several hours of searching without success, both men became even more concerned and decided to contact the police. A patrol car soon arrived at the family's home to check everything out. The police also saw no sign of the woman and her daughter when they entered the house. There were no signs of a struggle maniac. It became obvious that the residents had simply left. The missing couple's cell phones were not found inside. Then a neighbor approached the house and said she had seen Alcione and Anna leave their home around 6 p.m. and head their usual road toward the bridge. Initially, the police were reluctant to launch a search because they hadn't noticed anything suspicious. There were no signs of a break-in or struggle in the house. The women had left voluntarily without coercion. There were no signs of a crime. Furthermore, they were dealing with an adult 42-year-old woman and her daughter who had dead quite recently. Perhaps their plans had simply changed. They had decided to take a longer walk or to visit someone. They weren't obligated to report to anyone. They tried to persuade the brother to return home and wait for his sister. However, by this point, quite a bit of time had passed and it was already dark. He began to suspect that something was wrong and both of them might be in trouble. Under pressure from relatives, a search was launched for the missing women. Another, less than obvious incident immediately caught their attention. Before a full-scale search and rescue operation could begin, another report was filed with the police station from the outskirts of the city. People living a few meters from Elsie and Anna's home called the police to report a suspicious motorcycle abandoned near a bridge, Saru. It was located above the river and on the very route Alcione and her daughter were expected to take bike. Since this call was a lower priority than the potential missing women's report, they didn't immediately respond. Now the police arrived to investigate. A motorcycle was indeed found near the bridge, but there was no sign of the driver. Suspecting that the person may have been in a traffic accident and injured, they began searching the area. About 15 minutes passed before they discovered something far more terrifying than an injured motorcyclist. Two lifeless bodies were spotted in the riverbed a few dozen meters from the abandoned motorcycle. The first was a woman, the second a girl, likely in her teens. They were in terrible condition. Suspicions arose that the two police reports might be connected. The bodies were in the water, in meter from the shore, visible to the naked eye in Bakul. The victims were dressed in tracksuits, but their underwear was pulled down. A quick identification was complicated by the girl and woman having suffered multiple blows to the head and face with a blunt instrument. They were severely disfigured in the sick. However, since both were well known locally, it soon became clear that the deceased were Alcione and Anna. Their clothing was identified by a neighbor who encountered them as they were leaving home, and relatives settled the matter. The woman was 42 years old at the time of her death, and her daughter was 16. What Trabok theory included suicide zvikonti. Mother and daughter could have arrived on a motorcycle, jumped off a bridge, or it could have been an accident. But none of this sounded plausible. They had no history of mental health issues. The family was considered decent, strong, close-knit, and respected until the tragic moment. They had no legal troubles, criminal ties, or financial problems, so soon the medical examiner officially confirmed that this was a violent crime, so theories of suicide and accident were quickly dismissed. Local residents who contacted the police and reported the motorcycle confirmed that the unknown person had stopped there because it stalled. They had seen an unknown man riding around the area and then suddenly appearing near the river. All this happened several hours before the official search for the woman and her daughter began. Witnesses didn't see what the unknown person was doing, but when he tried to drive away, the motorcycle broke down. One local even tried to help him. When the man began approaching the motorcyclist, the latter reacted very strangely. He began acting aggressively and threateningly, tried to drive him away, and then simply fled. His behavior seemed suspicious, so the witness contacted the police. But no one had searched the surrounding area at the time, so the bodies were never found. According to the initial investigation, the motorcycle's owner could have been connected to the murders of Alcione and Anna. The bodies were sent to the Forensic Institute near Guanambi. While the examination was underway and the report was awaited, the motorcycle's records were checked. The license plate had been removed, but the records obtained from the bureau showed that it did not belong to the victims or their family members. The vehicle was registered to a man named Mark Aurelio de Silva E. The suspicion that the attack on the mother and daughter was sexually motivated was the first priority, as it could yield valuable evidence. This was confirmed during the autopsy. Both women had been raped before the murders, and their underwear had been removed. There was no water in the women's lungs, meaning they had died before entering the water. Each had suffered multiple blows to the head and face with a blunt instrument. Around the same time, a bloody brick was discovered near the river Adi-Iva. Detectives believed it was the murder weapon. Subsequent analysis confirmed this. It contained the victim's blood. The blows had fractured their skulls, causing internal bleeding. Mother and daughter lost consciousness and then died quickly. Attempts were made to conceal the victims' bodies by dragging them along the riverbed and dumping water into them. However, the water was not deep enough to conceal them. Given all these actions, the perpetrator must have been fully aware of what had happened. He deliberately attempted to cover his tracks. Against this backdrop, it seemed odd that he simply abandoned his motorcycle a few dozen meters from the victims' villages, thus providing police with evidence against himself. In any case, the brutality could have indicated mental issues, which would justify any discrepancies in actions and logic. The search for the prime suspect began. He lived near Alcione and Anna's house, but he was never found there. It was suspected that he had gone on the run, which would explain why he had simply abandoned the motorcycle there. Now capturing the suspect could be much more difficult as he had a head start of several hours down. By the time the search for Mark began, the entire Alciona and Anna family received the tragic news of their deaths. News quickly spread throughout Guanambi, Suini. Soon, the local community began asking legitimate questions. People wanted to know who committed this horrific crime and under what circumstances. Sulies. Due to the level of brutality, journalists dubbed this double murder the Guantidi Guanambi case. Soon, the crime was discussed nationwide and wide and beyond. Public attention was focused on the actions of law enforcement. The police were under pressure to make the city's streets safer, and accusations of incompetence and inaction poured in. To calm public unrest, a press conference was held, moderated by lead investigator Maya Stegator. He updated the public on the current state of the investigation, human station. However, this wasn't the biggest problem. It was his statement about the victims' clothing. He claimed Alciona and Anna were found wearing tight-fitting sportswear. The police officer believed this could have attracted the attacker's attention, triggering his instincts. As soon as the press conference aired, many expressed outrage at the investigator's statements. He was criticized for attempting to blame the victims themselves for his murder. The public outrage was so widespread that the police removed the detective from the case the very next day and apologized for his comments. Only this managed to at least somewhat quell the growing anxiety and discontent of local residents. However, this only added fuel to the fire, so all efforts were focused on capturing Mark. To quickly find the motorcycle's owner, a joint operation was organized between the Guanpi Interior Police and the Military Police Battalion, Ugly Sikos, and the Police Battalion City. Law enforcement officers interviewed local residents. Forensic experts thoroughly examined the area around the bridge. Residents provided a detailed description of the suspicious motorcyclist and identified Mark from photographs available in databases. The military used its resources to track him. Several cordons were established and exits from Guanxi were monitored. All suspects were checked. Less than 24 hours after the murders of Alcioni and Anna, new information regarding Mark's location was received. On December 13, police arrived in the Iponema district, located a few dozen kilometers from Guanambi. There, Mark dos Silva, then 36, was located and arrested. He offered no resistance, Imanaruki. Remarkably, when police arrested the prime suspect in the double murder, he was strolling through his property with his tubig or his teenage son, Rugrupesan Alisan Oceanes. The police station detained both us, ostensibly because they suspected the man's son was also involved in the crime. However, this theory was soon dismissed. The boy was returned as a member of Marco's family, but his father attracted far more attention from detectives. To reassure the public, a Ichu press conference was held after the arrest. It emphasized the suspect's arrest in record time and the failure of the previous detective leading the investigation. Was story then was simply overlooked. When questioned, the prime suspect attempted to mislead investigators from the very beginning. Despite the motorcycle being officially registered in his name, Marco was initially not informed that the detectives already knew this. He himself stated that he did not own any vehicle at all. But when shown the motorcycle's registration information, he changed his story and claimed the bike was stolen on Saturday, the day before the double murder. However, Marco still hadn't reported it to the police because the weather was bad and he simply hadn't had time. He claimed he was waiting for things to improve. Naturally, this all sounded implausible. Furthermore, the suspect was confused about the circumstances surrounding the theft and couldn't immediately say where the motorcycle was at the time. After these contradictory stories, pressure began to build on Marco, who became even more confused. Soon his conversation with investigators ended with him confessing to the double murder. He said he had long struggled with mental health issues, but hadn't timmat for fear of being forced into infollowndes treatment. One of the few tools that helped him cope with the voices in his head and his desire to end his life was his motorcycle. He often rode it area, choosing the scenic route over the bridge and the river. Around midday on that fateful day, Mark was going through a difficult time. The voices wouldn't stop, demanding bloodshed. He decided to silence them with a tried and true method, going for a ride. By an unfortunate coincidence, Alsing and Anna crossed his path. During the ride, he spotted the mother and daughters slowly moving away from the paths toward the dense undergrowth. They were clearly visible. The voices grew especially loud, and Marco was unable to resist them. He followed the strangers at a distance, far enough away to avoid spooking them, but kept them in sight. He followed them for some time, reaching a bridge where both were as far away from any buildings or people as possible. At that moment, the killer decided to act. He parked his motorcycle in an inconspicuous spot, circled their path, and then lay in wait. As he approached the women, Marco accidentally discovered a brick in the bushes, which he decided to use for the attack. Armed with this heavy object, he jumped out of the bushes and struck Alcyon on the head. The woman tried to fight back and shielded her daughter, but after sustaining several serious wounds, she began wheezing and fell, bleeding profusely. All this time, the daughter couldn't stand by and didn't run away. She tried to protect her mother, but she too was powerless against the much stronger man. After the first blow with a brick, Anna fell to the ground and quickly became still. Despite the lack of resistance, the attacker continued to beat her with a brick. Both victims sustained multiple injuries, which proved fatal. Although Marco refused to disclose the true motive for the attack, citing mental health issues, it was believed that the entire story was a lie. The police began to theorize that rape was the attacker's intention. He wanted to immobilize them, but he beat them too severely, causing their deaths. In any case, after completing his bloody deeds and the abuse of the bodies, Marco attempted to stage an accident or suicide by dumping them in the water. Investigators believed this stood in stark contrast to his story of mental health issues. He must have been fully aware of what was happening to commit the crime and to hide the bodies of the deceased who were no longer showing signs of life in the river before returning to the motorcycle which he had abandoned near the bridge. It started, but Marco couldn't get far because it stalled almost immediately. All attempts to revive the motorcycle were unsuccessful and only attracted the attention of local residents. When Marco saw a stranger approaching and trying to help, he began to drive them away and then decided to flee. He claimed he didn't want to leave the motorcycle to its fate and planned to return for a later when things had calmed down. Marco had hoped to wait a couple of days, but the search for the missing persons and the investigation began too soon, and he was caught too quickly. Marco cited mental health issues, insisting that voices in his head ordered him to kill. However, he had no prior mental health diagnoses, and speaking with the suspect's family members, diary members only confirmed the staged version. None of them had ever heard Marco complain about anything like that. He had always had a bad temper, but they chalked it up to his natural aggression. A background check revealed he had always been troubled. His behavior had become increasingly complex during his rebellious period. The primary theory was supported by the killer's penchant for sexual assault. Initially, his record consisted of minor incidents. He hadn't received any serious punishments, so the situation began to escalate. Before the murder, the man had been arrested in 2018 when Marco attempted to rape another woman in the city. He also attacked her but didn't use any objects to beat her. He hadn't had the strength to do so. The victim managed to fight him off and call for help. Thus, suspicions arose that he might have been involved in other unsolved sexual assaults in which he had managed to remain undetected, and investigations began, but confirmation was not immediately possible. Much more time was needed. Mark himself refused to continue cooperating with the investigation. He denied any connection to other crimes. However, even without confession, this topic was widely discussed online and by journalists. Several theories were put forward about Mark's involvement in crimes in Gwanambi and the surrounding area. The investigation continued. Everything needed to be analyzed and compared. The prosecutor's office had a wealth of evidence, including direct evidence. In addition to the killer's confession, the murder weapon was found. Mark's fingerprints and DNA were found on it. DNA samples were extracted from the bodies, directly linking him to the murder. The lawyer tried to secure house arrest for the duration of the investigation, but the man was now considered a particular danger to society due to his history of recidivism. He remained in prison. Over the following years, dozens of forensic examinations and laboratory tests were conducted, including a psychiatric examination. Several experts worked with Marco, who concluded that he was fully aware of everything when he killed Alcione and Anna. It took years, while the suspect spent years behind bars to document everything and prepare for the hearings. During this time, the public was outraged. People repeatedly criticized the state. No one could feel safe in the face of such a brutal murder. If Marco had been brought to attention sooner and punished more severely for his previous crimes, this tragedy would not have occurred. The Brazilian justice system often works slowly. This time, the situation was little different. Numerous stages of the hearings lay ahead. The first took place at the end of 2022, shortly before the trial began. Local residents of Gwanambi held a public demonstration. People demonstrated demanding justice for Alcione and Anna. The public followed the events with bated breath. Every stage of the trial was televised. Every decision was announced and sparked public debate. Finally, 4 years after the double murder, the moment arrived for Marco to stand trial. The hearing was scheduled for July 2025. While the prosecution's tactics were obvious, Marco's defense attorney's approach was more like improvisation. He tried by hook or by crook to emphasize his client's psychiatric problems, even though they hadn't been confirmed by numerous expert examinations. The defense attorney also tried to convince the jury that the investigation had focused on him alone from the start. He simply happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The defense attorney believed Mark confessed under police pressure, which was applied to smooth over any lapses. Once again, the investigator's contradictory statement about the victim's appearance attracting the attacker's attention came to mind. But here, witnesses testified in court who had seen Mark near the crime scene at the approximate time of the women's deaths. Following the trial, the jury found the man guilty. The prosecution's evidence was compelling. Marco received a sentence of 68 years and 8 months in prison. In addition, he was ordered to pay a fine equivalent to 1/3 the regional minimum wage. Marco is being held in a closed regime. The victim's families hope he will remain there forever. 68 years in prison, the maximum sentence that will forever erase the name of Marco Aurelio da Silva from the annals of the living world. But did this harsh sentence provide any solace for the family of the deceased? For Alciona's husband, this finale did not bring back the warmth of home. The hammering of the judge's hammer cannot drown out the ringing, deathly silence that now reigns in the rooms of his house. Every Sunday he looks out onto the empty road. His beloved girls will never again walk holding hands and cheerfully discussing plans. Alcione gave her life trying to protect her daughter, and Yana died simply because she couldn't bear to watch someone else's pain and didn't want to run away. They're gone, but the memorial by the bridge remains a perpetual reminder of how fragile human life is on deserted roads. The story is over. The criminal is isolated, but the scars on the heart of a small town will never heal. And here arises the most important, most frightening question, to which the investigation has no answer. How many more such quiet, unnoticed predators are currently stalking their victims in the thickets along roadsides around the world? And are we willing to do anything to prevent our next ordinary walk from turning into another nightmare? If you like my work, subscribe to the channel and support this video with a like. Let's discuss this story in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to my Telegram channel, where I publish interesting crime news daily. The link will be in the description of the video. Thank you all, and bye.